So will there be any punishment? This question's asked more and more since peace deals keep appearing. Putin's team tries hard to stop a tribunal from forming. But can a special court for acts of aggression be stopped now? And how far have Ukrainian partners gone in its creation? TSN special correspondent Natalia Armola reports.
We're pressured, so we must hurry. A special court for Russian aggression is threatened. It may fold before it reads merutet. These claims arose right after a so-called peace plan appeared. Among its 28 points, amnesty for war crimes thus.
Ambassador Anton Horenevitier Ashores working to The Hague hasn't to acid long the stopped.
The main thing is we're moving. That's key, and we're moving constantly. That's crucial. And we aren't alone, but with our partners.
Ukraine's the biggest crime scene in the world. Over 178,000 war crimes by Russia are recorded. None have time limits. None can be pardoned. It's not just Ukraine's demand. That's how international law works.
For international crimes, there's a rule. They're never amnestied. The act of aggression, a political choice, having power to start a war, it's not amnestied.
Special court for aggression, where those who gave orders at the top may end up is historic titas to be. This June, Ukraine and the Council of Europe signed an agreement to create it. Since then, there have been more practical steps. The EU has allocated 10 million euros to a core group to launch the court ASAP. The Netherlands pledges to assist.
And security will be key in this process. Several possible locations are now being discussed, including former tribunal premises. The Dutch Ministry of Justice and Security is handling this.
One can say exactly when the tribunal will launch, as over 40 countries are involved, not just in Europe. The text of this so-called Restorative Expanded Agreement on the Steering Committee is being finalized. It's basically an alliance of countries that will run the court now.
We expect this to happen this month, and other countries will join it. After consulting with legal advisors from the G7, the Baltics, and the EU, we expect many countries to join this partial agreement.
Full member will pay fixed annual fees. Again, the steering committee will set the amount. An associate member will pay voluntary contributions, right? So, without fixing a specific sum.
Is there a future threat to the tribunal's work? We asked EU chief diplomat Kallas. Her answer is clear. Without punishment, there can be no lasting peace, not only in Ukraine, but worldwide.
Must be accountability for crimes committed. These are the basic principles of international law and criminal law as such. And why is that? Again, on the one hand, to ensure justice for the victims who suffered, and on the other, to deter future aggression or future crimes. After all, if they go unpunished, impunity breeds new impunity.
Russians' very attempt to avoid future trials with the amnesty clause is another public admission of guilt and evidence they fear punishment. And not only ministers and generals, but also Putin personally. No wonder he included everyone who voted in Paris to create the tribunal on the sanctions list. Natalia Yarmola, Gennady Shulga, TSN 1+1, Marathon.
Step by step, he is following the path of the Soviet Union. An expert points out Putin's main fatal mistake. There is no way back for Russia anymore, says economist Andrei Novak.
And for more details, check out our report. You are watching the Glavred channel. I'm your host, Evgeny Serov. Please like and subscribe to the channel.
The increase in war spending indicates that Russia is confidently following the path of the USSR and repeating its history. This was stated in an interview with Glavred by the head of the Committee of Economists of Ukraine, Andrei Novak. He recalled that the high militarization of the Soviet Union's economy led to the collapse of the USSR, and that happened even without a war. There was no war at the time of the collapse. The Soviet Union's maximum spending on the military-industrial complex amounted to 39% of the USSR's budget. Russia has already almost reached this level, having allocated more than 38% of its 2026 budget to war and defense. In other words, we are witnessing an exact repetition of the root causes of the Soviet Union's collapse. Russia is following the Soviet path step by step, the expert noted. Novak pointed out that the main reason for the collapse of the Soviet Union was the economy. It was the Soviet economy that could not withstand the arms race and the spending on the military-industrial complex. And at a certain point, the Union budget lost the ability to finance the budgets of the republics. The same thing is happening now in the Russian economy. The federal budget can no longer finance the budgets of the Federation's regions at the previous level. In particular, this is evidenced by the fact that already in 2025, local budgets have significantly reduced their expenditures. This even includes spending on war needs, such as payments for Russian citizens signing contracts with the Russian army, the expert explained. He noted that in most regions of Russia, the lump sum payment upon signing a contract has decreased from 3 million rubles to 600,000. That is, by 5 times. I want to emphasize, these are the main expenses of Russians that ensure the conduct of the war against Ukraine, but even they are being reduced. If these Kremlin prioritized items in local budgets are not being fulfilled, one can imagine how non-priority expenditures for the Russian authorities are being...
Un incident grave s'est produit dans la région de Moscou. Le 8 décembre, dans la ville de Kachira, le bâtiment de l'administration du district a pris feu. Sur les images prises sur les lieux, on peut voir des flammes et une épaisse fumée noire, ainsi que des véhicules des services d'urgence. Selon le ministère des situations d'urgence, 412 personnes ont été évacuées du bâtiment et la surface de l'incendie a atteint 30 mètres carrés. L'incendie a été maîtrisé, cependant la cause de l'incident n'a pas été communiquée. Pendant ce temps, à Koursk, le 8 décembre, environ 200 Russes sont descendus dans la rue pour manifester. Selon la chaîne Telegram Astra, un rassemblement de réfugiés des zones frontalières ayant perdu leur logement et leurs biens lors des bombardements a eu lieu dans la ville. La raison de la protestation a été la déclaration du gouverneur de la région de Koursk, Alexandre Kinstein, concernant la suppression des paiements mensuels de 65 000 roubles. Aux personnes qui ont perdu leur maison à cause des hostilités dans la région, provoquées par l'invasion à grande échelle de l'Ukraine par la Russie. Il est à noter que depuis le début de l'année, plus de 73 milliards de roubles ont été alloués à ces paiements, mais le gouvernement russe a décidé de réaffecter ces fonds à d'autres besoins. Désormais, les réfugiés exigent le maintien des paiements auxquels ils ont droit, ainsi qu'une révision des critères d'attribution des certificats de logement et l'annulation des crédits hypothécaires, pour les logements perdus, endommagés ou devenus impropres à l'habitation. Il est à noter que le conseiller du gouverneur a accusé les manifestants de ne pas défendre leur propre maison contre les attaques, ce qui a provoqué l'indignation parmi les réfugiés.
« Dis-moi, c'est toi qui as dit qu'on devait se défendre, n'est-ce pas ?»«
Et qui est-ce ?»« C'est ce que vous avez dit. »«
De quoi parles-tu ?»«
Comment ça ?»« Non !»«
Vous avez dit !»«
Et comment étions-nous censés nous défendre ?»
De plus, le député du district de Soudja dans la région de Koursk, Vassili Ilin, a enregistré une vidéo dans laquelle il attire l'attention sur les promesses non tenues des autorités.
Vous avez personnellement déclaré que personne n'a le droit d'annuler ses paiements, à l'exception du président lui-même. Mais en réalité, il s'avère que le gouvernement, je le répète encore une fois, la Fédération de Russie et personnellement Mantourov ont annulé ces paiements.
À noter que le 6 décembre, le gouverneur Alexandre Kinstein a annoncé qu'en décembre, les habitants de la région de Koursk, dont les biens ont été détruits ou endommagés, recevront la dernière compensation mensuelle d'un montant de 65 000 roubles. Selon lui, il est nécessaire de répartir les fonds afin, je cite, de « donner un nouvel élan à l'économie de la région ». Pendant que des manifestations ont lieu dans la région de Koursk, les îles Kouril ont été secouées par un tremblement de terre. Selon les médias, le 8 décembre, un séisme s'est produit près des Kourils du Sud. Il est précisé que les secousses étaient à peine perceptibles et n'ont été ressenties que dans quelques localités. Rappelons qu'en juillet de cette année, un violent séisme a frappé la péninsule russe du Kamtchatka. Il avait été qualifié de plus puissant de la région au cours des 73 dernières années. À ce moment-là, la magnitude du séisme était de 8,7. Le tremblement de terre a également secoué Sakhalin et les îles Kouril. Dans certaines localités, l'état d'urgence a été instauré. Au même moment, un tsunami atteignant jusqu'à 4 mètres de hauteur a été enregistré dans le district d'Elizovo, au Kamtchatka.
Russian leader Vladimir Putin has found himself in a dead end in the war against Ukraine. Despite prolonged fighting, the Kremlin has no idea how to achieve victory and is only accumulating problems. This is written by Edward Carr, deputy editor of The Economist. He notes that if the war continues until June 2026, it will surpass the First World War in duration. Carr draws a historical parallel. The Allies were able to break through German positions. In 1918, just as today, Ukraine continues to resist, while Russia does not know how to gain the upper hand. In his opinion, a dictator who lacks a theory of victory inevitably accumulates risks. Petro Olishchuk, political scientist and lecturer at Taras Shevchenko National University of Kyiv, is now live with us in the studio. Welcome, Mr. Petro.
Thank you.
So Putin has found himself at a dead end in the war against Ukraine. The fighting continues. He doesn't know how to win, as analysts report in their article. But can he actually stop? Because he has to take into account both political and social risks. The entire army that's now fighting at the front could return and potentially overthrow Putin himself.
I think he himself is convinced that in the end he will defeat everyone. He regularly receives such reports. He's used to ignoring the state of the economy because he believes it's unimportant compared to the global goals he's pursuing. I am more than certain that he regularly receives information from his, let's say, ministers, and generally from people who have contact with him about certain problems in the economy. That it would be better to wrap up this war, but most likely he doesn't listen to anyone because he has become completely convinced that he must achieve victory, that this is some kind of decisive, extremely important, significant war, and so on. At the same time, again, I think that right now there are many directions in which the timing is being determined. Still, perhaps Putin's position will change depending on certain objective circumstances that even he will not be able to ignore. What do I mean by that? Well, of course, it's the sanctions. It's clear that the sanctions have not fully achieved the objectives set for them due to sanctions evasion and because they have often been rather half-hearted and inconsistent in many respects. But in my opinion, their impact is less significant. And the recorded largest discount on Russian oil in a year demonstrates that, in principle, sanctions against Russian oil companies are not just empty words. The next sanctions are being imposed by Ukrainian special services, in particular today's latest operation carried out by the SBU, the GUR, and other relevant agencies. I mean the attack on the port in Novorossiysk. This is a very telling story, which, by the way, has already had an impact even on the global oil market. Prices have risen there, and many see this as a risk for Ukraine. But if prices rise not because of Russian oil, then frankly we don't care. It's clear to us that in the near future, Russia won't be able to use this terminal to export oil. And this is one example of the kind of sanctions that Ukraine is directly imposing with its drones. And with other appropriate means, and this also works in a certain way. So one way or another, sooner or later, even the Russian dictator obsessed with the war against Ukraine will be forced to admit that something needs to be done about this because the risks to his regime will continue to grow. I agree that he probably sees ending the war as a risk to his regime, especially in the context of soldiers returning home and in general, that this mobilization of society will immediately disappear. But on the other hand, continuing the war will also carry certain risks. And so once again, I can't say when the idea that ending it is actually easier will prevail, because the Russian leadership does not always act based on rational reasons or motives. Nevertheless, all these factors inevitably have an impact in the end.
Mr. Petro, we have just a minute left to talk. What domestic political scenarios are possible for Russia if the war drags on?
Well, again, it's quite difficult to predict Russian politics because it is closed off and non-public. It's clear that Putin's paranoia, which is widely discussed, did not arise out of nowhere. After all, we can recall the attempted Prigozhin mutiny. So I assume that his paranoia will continue to grow, and at the same time, the risks of a real coup will also increase because, in the end, all of this affects the pockets of specific individuals. The fact that Russians are dying there or that something is connected to this doesn't concern anyone in the Russian elite at all. But the fact that someone is directly touching their income, I think that will worry many of them one way or another. And again, even the Russian dictator won't be able to ignore this. But I repeat, he obviously tends to rely more on his own ideas about history or his own vision of history rather than on rational arguments. That's why it's quite difficult to predict. It's enough to recall that, for example, the entire American School of Criminology was unable to predict the collapse of the USSR. And this, in my opinion, is quite telling.
Mr. Petro, thank you. Petro Oleszczuk, political scientist and lecturer at Taras Shevchenko National University of Kyiv, was live with us in the studio.
The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine has confirmed the strike on an oil depot in Russia's Tambov region. According to the agency, on the night of December 3rd, units of the Ukrainian Defense Forces struck a number of Russian military facilities, including the Dmitrievskaya oil depot in the Tambov region. This facility is involved in meeting the needs of the Russian occupation army.
A hit on the target was recorded, followed by a fire at the facility. Preliminary reports indicate that several fuel storage tanks are burning. The results of the strikes are being clarified.
At the same time, the Telegram channel Astra reports that as a result of the attack on the oil depot in the Tambov region, 3 diesel fuel tanks burned down. In addition, the General Staff announced the destruction of a technical observation post on the MSP-4 offshore stationary platform in the Black Sea. According to preliminary information, the occupiers' UAV crew was eliminated and a radar station was hit. The agency also confirmed the destruction of 3 Orion reconnaissance and strike drones during the attack on November 27th on the Saki airfield in temporarily occupied Crimea. The cost of one such UAV is estimated at around $5 million. It has also been confirmed that the Livny oil depot in Russia's Oryol region was hit, where 2 storage tanks caught fire after a drone strike. Meanwhile, it became known that on the night of December 1st, an explosion occurred on a section of the Druzhba oil pipeline in Russia. This was reported by Union, citing a source in the main intelligence directorate. It is noted that the attack took place near the settlement of Kazinskie Viselki on the Taganrog-Lipetsk section of the oil pipeline. According to the agency's source, explosives with remote detonation were used. The fact of the explosion at the Druzhba pipeline was commented on by political strategist Boris Tizenghausen on his YouTube channel. According to him, this incident once again demonstrates the weakness of the Putin regime.
He can't protect Russia, Putin can't protect himself, he can't even protect key facilities.
It should be noted that the Druzhba oil pipeline has been attacked at least 4 times this year.
No vertical hierarchy.
Putin was asked why he is bombing the homes of Russian-speaking Ukrainians. Geeta Mohan, a journalist from India Today, addressed Putin during an interview he gave on the eve of his visit to India. Russian dictator Vladimir Putin dodged a direct answer to the Indian journalist's question, in which he asked him to explain the Russian strikes on eastern Ukraine.
I didn't understand the question. Shocked by what? The people I met were shocked that an operation was launched during which their homes were destroyed. They lived in eastern Ukraine.
To this, Putin repeated the false propaganda claim that Russia was supposedly forced to help that part of Donbass which allegedly was not under Ukraine's control and which Ukraine was allegedly destroying.
The answer is very simple. They lived in that part of Ukraine, in that part, let's say, of the same Luhansk or Donetsk region, which was under the control of the Kyiv authorities. But that part of the Luhansk or Donetsk region, which was not under their control, was being destroyed by the Kyiv regime.
After such blatant lies, Putin added nonsense about how the Russian Federation supposedly gave people the opportunity to express themselves in an open referendum. He is referring to the fake, illegal referendums that Russia organized in 2014 during the beginning of the occupation of certain settlements in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. The results of the fake referendum were not recognized by the Ukrainian authorities or the European Union. During his visit to India on December 4th and 5th, Putin intends to discuss international issues. The Kremlin noted that the parties will sign a number of intergovernmental and commercial documents.